the Iron Dome. To tell us more about how it works, we're joined by Dr. Andreas Krieg, who is a defence expert at King's College London School of Security Studies. Good morning to you.
Yeah.
So tell us about the Iron Dome. How does it work?
Well, I mean, the Iron Dome is really Israel's operational solution to what is essentially a strategic problem. So they had to deal with this missile problem for more than a decade now, and what they came up with is a missile defense system that consists of three parts. Which one is a launcher, one is a radar station, and the other one is a mobile control unit. The way this works is basically a artificial intelligence that tries to assess the trajectory of the incoming missiles, and then says which missile would potentially pose a risk, and then decides which missile to attack and to destroy in mid-air. The problem with that is that obviously Hamas is not really their missile technology is not really based on quality but quantity, and the problem with that is that obviously every launcher of these 10 batteries that Israel has of this Iron Dome, which are spread across the country, only has 20 intercepting missiles. And so if you fire a couple of hundred of missiles, the Iron Dome has to select which missile it wants to attack at what time, and whether, obviously not every incoming missile is really posing a threat to civilian areas. So in that respect, if you have too many missiles coming in and you have 20 intercepting missiles out of 10 batteries that are spread across Israel, you can be very easily overwhelmed. And this time around, we've really seen this, because Hamas has quite, in terms of quantity, loads and loads of missiles, and the system then has to select which ones pose the most risk and intercept them. And that leaves quite a lot that will come through. And let's also not forget a missile defense system is never like a dome, right? Although it has the name of a dome, it's never 360 degrees. It's always 40 degrees in one direction. So there's quite a lot of dead space where missiles can come in and the system can't intercept.
So there are certainly ways of getting around it, and it's a misnomer that it's an Iron Dome. But It is effective, isn't it? I mean, how much higher do you think the death toll would be without it?
Well, the Israelis claim that it's up to 90% effective, and they said it has saved thousands and thousands of civilian lives. This is true, particularly in the last, in the last years, in recent years, because we've seen Hamas really developing its missile technology to a new level. So also not just because of initially a couple of years ago they had only homemade, very small, short-range missiles, and what we see now is more and more long-range missiles that have been really become more and more effective, not just in terms of range, also in terms of what they can hit, and that's because of incoming technology from outside, particularly from Iran. So the Iron Dome has been fairly effective over the years. The problem, though, with that effectiveness is it has kind of undermined the ability or willingness of Israel to actually go and address the root cause of violence, because what they're doing right now is basically trying to eradicate the missile capability of Hamas without actually addressing the root cause of that violence, the root cause of insecurity in this part of the world. And that's basically the absence of an Israeli political solution to the Palestinian problem.
So you think it might be getting in the way of a diplomatic solution?
Absolutely. So what Israel has been doing, because they have failed to actually advance on the two-state solution, they've failed to advance on even the Oslo agreements and other agreements they've signed, they've now tried to find a way to sustain this situation, which is politically and strategically unsustainable, through operational means, through military means. Because as long as obviously Israeli civilians feel that they are secure, Israel can continue on that oblivious approach that they're on, because people are feeling secure. And now for the very first time, with the Iron Dome actually being overwhelmed and more missiles hitting civilian areas within Israel, I think Israelis are now trying to ask themselves whether this is actually a sustainable approach. And, the answer is it is not. So it should not distract from any political solutions to this conflict.
How much does it cost having this Iron Dome?
It costs a region of a couple of billion each year in terms of operating costs. Most of these costs are being being borne by the US government and US taxpayers through a US military aid. But, just to illustrate the issue of the Iron Dome. So what you have here is the incoming missiles will cost Hamas something starting from very low of a few $100s to a few $1,000s. Each intercepting missile that Israel has to fire, the Iron Dome has to fire, costs about $80,000 to $100,000. So it is a system that the more Hamas is firing, the more Israel has to pay. And obviously there's quite a huge asymmetry in terms of how much it costs.
And of course it doesn't protect from attacks from within. We've had Arab and Jewish Israelis fighting each other in this particular outbreak of conflict. What will happen if that continues, or if a ground war begins between Israel and Palestine?
It's unlikely that we will see a ground war. I mean, the Israelis are quite risk averse, and particularly Netanyahu has been very risk averse. And the last time they had to go in 2014 into Gaza, it was quite a very high price that Israel had to pay. And they only were willing to do this because we had three Israeli youth being abducted, and they were still had the hope of trying to free them. This is not the case right now. They understand that this is the worst complex environment, an urban environment to fight in. They will not take the risk to do this time, I'm pretty sure. But as you say, the bigger issue is, and I think that's also the greater security concern for Israelis right now, is it's not the incoming missiles anymore. It's domestic intercommunal violence within Israel. For many, many years, this has really, assimilation and somewhat coexistence has, at least within Israel proper, has somewhat worked. And now many of these gaps between these communities have now erupted again. And I think this communal violence is something that there is no operational solution to this. There's definitely no military solution to this, as there is no military solution to the wider Palestinian problem. And I think that dealing with that is going to be the great challenge for Israel going ahead.
That is really fascinating analysis there. Thank you so much. That's Dr. Andreas Krieg, a defence expert at King's College London.